Welcome to the January coffee subscription video from Subtext Coffee. I'm here with Giuliano, Subtext's head roaster.
Hi everyone.
And production manager. And Giuliano's brewing the 3 coffees that are going to find their way into the filter subscription, one of which is also our espresso coffee subscription. We're going to be starting with Delio Stering. Now, Delio is a really interesting coffee. It's a coffee from Brazil, and we haven't had too many coffees from Brazil in our roastery.
Maybe only like 2 others before?
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think Brazilian coffee, I don't know, Giuliano, how would you describe let's say the most conventional Brazilian coffee?
For me, most conventional Brazils tend to be, lower fruit acidity, so I think more like dried fruit, in the raisin, date, cherry, dried cherry category, and tend to have a bit more body and exemplify more of like the chocolatey, nutty characteristics of coffee.
Yeah, definitely. They're certainly less fruity, I think, than some other origins coffees. But not all Brazilian coffee. I think we've seen most of our Brazilian coffee from Minas Gerais or Sao Paulo, but this coffee comes from a very different region of Brazil called Espirito Santo. It's honestly a region we've only clued into somewhat recently, and it's really exciting because it offers flavors, aromas that I don't think we've seen very much of at Brazil.
No.
I'll talk a little bit about the espresso first, and then we're kind of going to go through these coffees one by one. But one important point for subscribers making this coffee at home as an espresso, to our surprise, you've maybe heard me talk in the past about espresso ratios and how we treat espresso. You probably know by now that we're a pretty light roaster. We care very deeply about developing our coffee well enough that it's extremely sweet, extremely flavorful, and balanced, but with espresso, that really depends on the ratio you pull that coffee at. And so maintaining a light enough roast where as much origin characteristics are coming through does require you to pull slightly longer shots to avoid having, out of balance acidity. This coffee is a bit of an exception. Now, when you taste this coffee as a filter coffee, there is quite a bit of acidity. It's really pleasant. As an espresso, we do develop our espressos just a little bit more. They're by no measure dark, but we do develop them a little bit more. We find that at espresso concentrations, even long espressos, it really helps with balance, that little extra bit of development. Regardless, where we're usually pulling our espressos, especially our African espressos, fruitier, higher fruit acid espressos, at a 2.5 to even 3-to-1 ratio, Delio actually tastes good shorter. Now, we're not all the way down to a 2-to-1 ratio, but we are in the kind of 2.2 to 2.4 to 1 range. That'll be really important because if you try to pull this espresso longer, you do get, not roastiness, but you just get a little bit more bitterness. When you pull this shorter, it starts to reveal a lot of its qualities that are really exciting, which we'll talk about in a second when we taste this as a filter, because many of the flavors are quite transparent in both brew methods. So let's grab some cups.
Yeah, I got some cups right over here. Should pour me some as well.
Talk a little bit about Espiritu Santo now. I think compared to other regions in Brazil, it's quite a cooler growing region. One kind of abstruse characteristic of coffee that we see published all the time is altitude, and we ask this question of why is altitude important in coffee?
Right.
And the main reason is that it's cooler. And what does coolness do to fruit? It makes it ripen slower, and
helps for the coffee to develop complexity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anybody ripening tomatoes in their garden know that very quickly ripened tomatoes don't really taste like much, and the same principles to that fruit apply to the coffee fruit as well. And so slower ripening equals much more complex polyphenol structures and enzymatic structure in the coffee cherries. And that translates into the actual coffee seeds. And so we get much more complexity. So Espiritu Santo, which it's not super high altitude, it's not, 2,000 meters above sea level.
Nothing in Brazil is.
But it is higher. It is higher than I think some other regions of Brazil. And it's cooler. And so we get slower ripening and thus more acidity, more fruit acids, more complexity.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but they are mostly producing washed coffees in that region, right? Like, so they actually specialized in wash processed coffees, as opposed to the usual is pulp natural that we find in Brazil.
That's an important point because I think a lot of the tasting notes that you gave earlier with those kinds of rummy, some dried fruit, I wouldn't even use those tasting notes for washed Brazilian coffee from other regions often. I mean, there's always exceptions, of course, and hurts always in coffee to generalize, but a lot of those coffees are just kind of nutty.
Yeah.
And I think coffees from Espiritu Santo, which are mostly washed coffees, have so much more going on.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't try a coffee from this region until actually just last season I tried a coffee from another roaster, and I was shocked. I wouldn't have guessed that it was Brazil.
Yeah.
It had so much complex acidity. I mean, if you really pick it apart, maybe you could guess Brazil because it does have a bit of a nutty undertone and has some of those Brazilian qualities, but upon first taste, I would have maybe guessed another origin. For
sure. Yeah. So what do you taste in this coffee?
This coffee for me is kind of like, it's subtle, but it has a really subtle citrus acidity. The sweetness on it for me is more reminiscent of cherry or some sort of berry, and I get a really clean aftertaste that's refreshing. And I often say something that reminds me of slightly floral herbal tea.
Yeah.
But in a good way.
Yeah, in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah, I know. I think herbaceousness can scare some people. But more and more with really great coffees we've seen out of Santa Barbara in Honduras. We've seen, of course, out of Colombia. We've seen some Kenyan coffees that are herbaceous. And it's when you pair that herbaceousness with lots of articulate fruit, really balanced big sweetness and acidity, it's just complexity. So we're not really scared of it too much. I think of that herbaceousness as well, but what it makes me think of is actually cola. It has this kind of round, sweet, caramelly cola quality that is almost as well, that phosphoric acid you get in cola as well. It kind of comes through this. There's a little bit of citric acid, a little bit of phosphoric acid. So, we see phosphoric acid in Kenyan coffee predominantly, some Colombian coffee, but that phosphoric acidity is a very pleasant, I think it maybe tastes a little less like cola and more like grapefruit in its Kenyan manifestation, but very cool. Very delicious coffee, really complex, and the fact that it's from Brazil and washed is so much fun.
Yeah, and I get a little bit of nuttiness in the long finish, especially as the coffee cools. But honestly, if you haven't tried a washed Brazilian coffee from this region, I think it'll surprise you.
I think so too.
For what it can taste like.
Yeah, I think we are always hesitant to paint these broad strokes of any growing country, let alone region. And of course, for the crazy fermentation coffees coming out of Brazil, they have all kinds of flavors that come from that fermentation. But this is a great example of what a different terroir in a very large country can express. So should have mentioned as well, this is yellow and red catuai. So it's not this is some super loud variety either,
But it's a variety that grows really well in Brazil.
Yep.
And definitely in this region, or those two varieties rather.
All right, that's great. Very delicious.
All right, so we're going to move on into Colombia now. We're in the Suaza region, and this is the Divino Niño co-op. It's a community lot, because the farmers there don't actually produce enough of this variety. It's a pink Bourbon. So we've got several farmers, neighboring farms, part of this community, all bringing their pink Bourbon to create this lot.
Yeah, we have a video with Kyle from Osito, the importer, exporter, among other things. They do some amazing work where we chat a little bit more about these coffees in this region, so I recommend checking out that video.
Definitely.
But there's a lot of notable points about this coffee, right? So let's talk about community lots for a second. I mean, like you said, this is a single varietal coffee from a community, and that's rare. I think single varietal in the purest sense is rarer than people think to begin with. Not that many producers in the world produce and separate one variety of coffee. And it's because it's hard to produce enough of it, and then it's a lot of extra work to separate it in processing, in packaging, keep all of that traceable and transparent.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes they maybe also find that the coffee doesn't taste particularly too different from their other varieties, so they just choose, like blend this and sell it as one. Right?
It's possible, but I think a lot of our sensibilities as a project at Subtext is, we care about demonstrating as much of the characteristics at origin as possible, and so we do often seek out single varietal expressions. So this project is a project from in collaboration with, I should say, Osito and the Divino Niño Growers Group.
Right.
And this has been produced for a few years now, and Osito is, in fact, paying a premium for varietal separation of some of the louder, more exciting varieties that the specialty market, has been demanding more and more because they see the potential of these varieties. We'll get to the next coffee in a second, but to start with a variety that, I don't know what you've seen, but Pink Bourbon has probably only shown up on the specialty scene within the last 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I probably tried a Pink Bourbon maybe in my second year of coffee. I've been in the industry now maybe five going on 6 years, and but yeah, it was from Colombia. It was from another Canadian roaster, and I knew nothing about the variety. I just thought it's pink variation on Bourbon, but then definitely the proliferation of this variety coming out predominantly from Colombia now. I've seen it. Yeah, it's huge. There's a lot of Pink Bourbon, and I think it's because cup quality. Producers are finding like it's got really good cup quality, but it also has good yield and good decent disease resistance, right?
Yeah, when we get to the next variety, we'll talk about why that's so important for a variety that offers so much from a sensory perspective. Because, I think you're totally right. People thought that Pink Bourbon was just, like yellow and red Bourbon. Yes, I think good cuppers, early days, even 12 years ago, were talking about how they could taste a difference between yellow and red Bourbon.
Right.
Yellow and red indicating the color of the cherry. There'd be yellow ripened cherries and red ripened cherries. And Pink Bourbon is in fact pink looking, but it turns out
it's not from Bourbon.
That it's much deeper than that.
Yeah.
The actual varietal signature is quite different, and thus it offers a very different sensory experience. I don't know, how would you typically describe Pink Bourbon on the palate?
For me, this variety, I always taste it. It's from Colombian coffees. I don't think I've tried Pink Bourbon from anywhere else yet. But for me, it's always got pretty vibrant citrus acidity, sometimes mixed in with tropical fruits. Definitely the sweetness can be of, tropical or like an amplified cherry quality, or other stone fruits as well. But it tends to be very complex, very loud.
Yeah. Has a bit of that kind of candied cherry. Sometimes it can have a little bit of like pleasant herbaceousness.
Yeah.
But elevated acidity, elevated sweetness. I think that's for sure the case. And a decent amount of red fruit. Yes. You're getting some of that here, right? You get a little bit of like a subtle, like almost raspberry tea flavor.
This is a very pleasant cup. Like, definitely getting cherry notes. Definitely citrus. For a community lot that's been blended from different producers in the region, I think it's great.
I think it's a great coffee.
It's a great initiative to do that as well.
Definitely. Yeah, and there's a little bit of body in this coffee as well. It's not too tea-like. It has a little bit of a kind of chocolatey backbone to it.
So definitely.
Very fun. All right, let's move on to our last coffee.
Yes, so for our 3-bag or 6-bag subscribers, we got another fun variety from the same community, from the Divino Niño community.
Yeah. It's a special variety. I think we're always wary of when things get overly hyped up and overly sensationalized, and I think Gesha as a variety saw that quite a bit. I think, now listen, we've tasted some of the best Geshas, and they are mind-blowing. It's true. But your average Gesha that you would buy, it's pretty hit or miss. I think that they're often very expensive, and they're often disappointing. I'll say that.
Yeah, depends. Yeah, it depends where it's coming from, for sure.
Unless you're paying a lot of money, and then again, you have to kind of evaluate how much that's worth. You get kind of into this thing about celebrity producers and people who source coffee just for the kind of notoriety of those coffees, and I'm less excited about that, but I am excited about this variety. I think that I'm excited about this variety for the same reason that Ethiopia is one of our dearest growing regions, is because there's that floral lift is such an exciting component of coffee.
Yeah, and this variety does come from Ethiopia.
Very much. So this is a geisha produced by the Divino Niño Growers Group in Suaza, in southern Huila, and it is an affordable geisha, I'll say that, because it's coming from a growers group, but it offers a range of sensory experiences. It has, on the one end, a bit of a floral lift, which is exciting and really cool for a coffee that is, not necessarily $40 a bag or $50 a bag.
Yeah, and I think we should say, for those of you who maybe haven't tried geisha before, the geisha that we're referring to as, definitely has a lot of hype, and the specialty coffee praises is the Panama geisha.
Yeah.
Right, and also to a degree some of the Ethiopian geishas, but Panama geisha kind of has, a bit of a cult following around it.
Big time.
And so we have seen definitely producers all over the world start to plant geisha.
Yep.
And it doesn't taste the same in every country.
No.
Right? It definitely is a variety that is hard to grow. Doesn't yield a lot.
Yep.
Prefers cooler climates. It definitely tends to showcase more complexity at elevation, right? If it's grown at a higher elevation.
It sounds like elevation is kind of the key, one of the key components to growing geisha well and getting that super elevated floral quality. Yeah. And that's why in Panama, where the Petersons were growing it, for a while at a low elevation and it performing poorly, and then finally at closer to 2,000 meters above sea level is when the coffee really starts to shine.
Right.
And so, this coffee is grown a little lower than that, and thus it is very complex. It has some of the florality, but it's also less tea-like than I think some of those washed geishas. It has a little bit more mid-palate punch. The sweetness is broad, immediate, and round. And I think that makes it a really pleasing coffee to drink regularly. And for a subscription, I think that's...
I think also, we should compare it to the other coffee from this community, right? So the Pink Bourbon lot. In comparison, this is actually a much more delicate cup, in my opinion, right? It has soft citrus notes, a little bit of stone fruit, reminiscent of maybe peach, apricot, and it is very sweet, but it finishes a little bit more delicate on the palate, a little bit creamy in terms of the texture that I get, mouthfeel. It's a very pleasant coffee.
Yeah,
I think it's not quite as loud as the Pink Bourbon, but is very balanced and very sweet.
Yeah. Great. 3 really delicious coffees, different flavors, even with the Divino Niños that come from the same growing region, produced by the same producers, produced across multiple producers.
Yeah.
And, that is also an interesting experiment, because when you get varietal separation from a community group, it averages out all the kind of individuality of production or process that a single producer would apply to a coffee. Mm-hmm. And by smoothing that variation out, you get to really taste the varietal difference, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are some wine producers like Marcel Dice and Alsace that produce kind of either varietal blends or terroir blends for that reason, in addition to single varietal expressions of wine, just because it actually helps smooth out some of that variation. And again, for that reason, it makes this varietal separation community lot kind of a really interesting, fun sensory experience.
Definitely. And if you are, one of our 3 or 6 bag subscribers, try these coffees side by side. Mm-hmm. Definitely a really cool sensory experience.
Definitely. For anybody watching who wants recipes, go to our subscription page on our website. We've produced 9 different recipes. We do 3 recipes for each coffee. Batch brew, AeroPress, V60. We dial every coffee in specifically to help you get that coffee tasting good faster. It's always a challenge because different coffees of different densities, different regions, moisture contents, they tend to require a different grind. It's always going to be close, but especially if you're brewing on like an Encore or something, that like one tick really makes a big difference.
Definitely does. And if you ever have any questions about brewing, reach out to us.
Definitely.
We'd be more than happy to help.
Amazing. All right. Thanks for watching.
See ya.